The dead human battleship had not moved in 400 years, and diver Axel Thun intended to keep it that way while he stripped it bare. He hung in the cold 3,000 strides off its flank, a small soft creature in a patched salvage suit, watching the running lights of the pale tide gather around the hull like scavenger birds settling on a fallen beast. There were 19 reclamation skiffs in the swarm. There were 6 heavy cutting barges, each one a slab of clamps and grinding wheels long enough to swallow a small moon's worth of plate. There was the Syndicate flagship, the Long Hunger, a bloated thing of tanks and arms and feeding maws, and aboard it sat Tithemaster Vren Solgov, governing the harvest with the patience of a creature who had eaten 1,000 graves and never once been bitten. Axel had counted the graves too. He had been a salvage diver for 31 years, and in that time he had cut open the corpses of 41 warships and never found anything inside but rust and silence and the dried-out shapes of the dead. He had a number for everything. It was how he stayed alive. The brave divers measured a job by how fast they could finish it. Axel measured it by how many things could go wrong, and he counted them all, every time, before he went in. This one was different. Every diver in the swarm knew it. None of them said it. The battleship was enormous. It was 4,000 strides from bow to stern, a slab of gray metal so long that the running lights at one end could not see the lights at the other. A skiff could fly the length of it for a full minute and not reach the far end. Its hull was not pitted the way old hulls were. It was scarred. There were long furrows gouged into the armor where something had clawed at it and failed, and the furrows had a melted look, as if the metal had flowed back over its own wounds and sealed them from the inside. Across the bow, in letters 3 strides tall, a human word had been burned into the plating by an enemy weapon, and below it, deeper, the humans had answered by cutting their own word into the metal with their own hands. Axel could not read the human script. He did not need to. He could feel the meaning of it in the way the letters were carved, the way you can feel a snarl without knowing the language of the mouth that makes it. The enemy had burned a curse into the bow. The humans had carved a longer one underneath. And then, by every reading on every instrument in the swarm, the humans had died, every one of them, and the ship had gone cold, and 4 centuries had passed, and here it still hung, whole, with its enemy's curse, and its own deeper answer side by side on its scarred face. Diver Thun. The voice of the Harvest Overseer crackled in his helmet. You are drifting. The Tithemaster does not pay you to admire the merchandise. Reading the hull, Axel said. Old habit. Read it faster. The approach vector is open. You are first in. Find the reactor spine, mark it for the barges, and confirm the core is dead. Confirm it 3 times. The Tithemaster wants no surprises. Axel did not move. Why am I first in? There was a pause on the channel, the kind of pause that meant the Overseer was deciding how much truth a low diver was worth. Because you are cheap, the Overseer said at last, and because the last crew we sent into a human hull, 2 harvests ago, did not come back, and the Tithemaster would rather lose a Tuan than a trained boarding team. Approach. Now. Axel approached. He had always known what he was to the Syndicate. He was the soft thing you sent into the dark to find out whether the dark would kill it. He had survived for 31 years because he was careful, because he was a coward, and because in all those years he had learned the one rule the brave divers never lived long enough to learn. The rule was simple. When a dead thing looks too whole, it is not dead. It is waiting. The battleship looked very whole. He fired his suit jets in short, fearful taps and let himself drift down toward the hull, toward a gash in the armor where some ancient battle had torn the plating open and left a wound large enough for a skiff to fly through sideways. The edges of the gash were smooth. They had been smooth for centuries. Inside, the dark was complete, a black so total that his helmet lamps seemed to stop at the opening as if the ship itself were drinking the light and giving nothing back. His suit chimed, a sensor warning, soft and yellow. He froze. Overseer. I am reading a temperature gradient on the hull. The metal is 2 degrees warmer than the surrounding void. Not at the reactor. Everywhere. The whole hull is warm. Old reactors leak heat for a long time, diver. It is a corpse cooling. Continue. It has been 400 years. A corpse does not cool for 400 years. A corpse cools in a week, and then it is the temperature of the dark around it, the same as every other wreck I have ever entered, the same as all 41. This one is warm. Something inside it is making heat, right now, today. Then it is a corpse cooling slowly, the overseer said, and his voice had gone hard. Continue, or I find a diver who will, and you can explain to the tithe master why you refused the easiest mark in the field. Oxel continued, because the alternative to continuing was being thrown off the harvest, and being thrown off the harvest meant returning to the tithe master with empty hands, and returning empty-handed to Vren Solgov was a thing that divers did not do twice. He had seen what happened to the ones who did. The syndicate did not waste a meal on a creature that brought nothing to the table. He passed through the gash in the hull and into the body of the human battleship, and the dark closed over him like water. His lamps found a corridor. It was wide enough for 10 of him to walk abreast, and the walls were lined with conduits and cable, and the strange angular fittings the humans had loved. Every surface built for hands and bodies larger than his own. Frost coated everything in a thin gray fur. His breath fogged inside his helmet. The cold here was deeper than the cold of open space, and that made no sense, because open space was as cold could be, and yet his suit insisted the corridor was colder still, as if the ship were holding the cold the way a miser holds coin, hoarding it, saving it for something. He drifted forward. He counted his fears as he went, the old habit, the thing that kept the panic small enough to carry. 1. The warm hull. 2. The cold corridor that was colder than space. 3. The way his lamps would not reach the end of any hallway. 4. The silence. The wrecks he had robbed before were never truly silent. They ticked and groaned, metal contracting, ice shifting, the small voices of a dead thing settling. This ship made no sound at all. It was the silence of a held breath, not the silence of a corpse. He passed a sealed door, and then another, and then a row of them, each marked with the angular human script and a number he could read, because numbers were the one thing every species shared. The doors were berths, crew quarters. He counted them as he drifted, because counting was the only thing that kept his hands from shaking inside the gloves. 40 doors on this stretch of corridor alone. 40 rooms where 40 humans had slept, 400 years ago, between the watches of a war they were losing. He did not open any of them. The old rule held him back. A door that has stayed shut for 4 centuries has stayed shut for a reason, and the reason is never a good one, and a careful diver does not learn it. But one door, near the end of the row, hung very slightly open, and through the gap his lamp found something that stopped him cold. It was a wall of small frames. Pictures, the humans had called them, flat images of faces. The frost had not touched the inside of the berth the way it had touched the corridor, and the faces looked out at him through the gap in the door, dozens of them, soft alien faces with their strange flat features, smiling the human smile that Oxel had learned long ago was not a baring of teeth but the opposite, a thing they did when they were happy. Children, mates, old ones. The crew of this ship had carried the faces of their families to the very end of the war, had pinned them to the walls of a battleship that they must have known was never going home, and the faces were still there, still smiling, 400 years after every creature in them had turned to dust on a dead human world. Oxel had robbed 41 graves. He had never once felt like a grave robber until that moment, hanging in the dark, looking at the smiling dead through a door that had been left open by a hand that never closed it. He backed away from the berths. His lamp found a shape on the wall ahead of him, and he flinched so hard he cracked his elbow against a conduit, and the sound of it rang down the corridor and came back to him changed. It was a human, or it had been. The body was strapped into a wall cradle, a thing the humans used to hold their crew during hard maneuvers, and it had died there 4 centuries ago, and frozen and stayed. The suit it wore was bulky and scarred, marked with the same melted furrows as the hull, as if the crew had taken the same wounds as the ship and sealed them the same way. The faceplate was dark. Across the chest, Stenciled in the angular human script was a name Axel could not read and a symbol he could. A shield, broken cleanly across the middle, and behind the broken shield a second shield, whole. He had seen that symbol before. Every diver had. It was scratched into the wreckage in 9 different salvage fields across the dead human worlds, and the old divers said it was the mark of a single human fleet, a fleet that had fought the long retreat at the end of the human wars, and never once broken, not even when there was nothing left to break for. The old divers said the fleet had a rule, and the rule was the reason no one had ever found a survivor, and no one had ever found a coward. The rule was that they did not leave. Not the field, not the dead, not the grave. The old divers had a name for the fleet. They said it the way you say the name of a storm that took your family. They called it the Aegis. Axel had heard the stories all 31 years of his diving life, told low in the holds where the syndicate's listening ears did not reach. There was the story of the Thren fleet, 6 skiffs that went into an Aegis field in the old days and came back as one drifting hull full of the dead, the survivors having clawed their own helmets off for reasons no one could explain. There was the story of the catalog crew who scanned an Aegis hull from a safe 10,000 strides and lost their minds anyway, every one of them, in the same hour, screaming about a voice that knew their names. The young divers said the stories were lies told to keep the cheap labor frightened and obedient. The old divers said nothing at all, and looked into their drink, and that silence had always frightened Axel more than any story. He stared at the broken shield symbol on the dead human's chest, and felt the careful animal at the back of his skull, the coward that had kept him alive for 31 years, begin to scream. "Overseer," he said, and his voice came out thin. "This is an Aegis hull." The channel was silent for a long moment. "Repeat," the overseer said. All the boredom had drained out of his voice. "It carries the broken shield mark. The whole shield behind it. This is one of the Aegis ships. This is not a freighter wreck, and it is not a line cruiser. This is a warship from the very end of the human wars. And it is intact, and the metal is warm, and the crew sealed their wounds the way the hull sealed its own." Axel was backing toward the gash now, his jets firing in frightened little pulses, his lamp swinging wildly across the frozen human and the conduits and the dark that drank his light. "Overseer, the database says the Aegis hulls were never recovered. Not one. 11 of them. The database says none were ever found. Do you understand what I am telling you? They were never found because nobody who found one came back to file the report. We did not lose the Aegis ships. They lost the people who went looking." On the flagship Long Hunger, 400 strides of grinding machinery and clamping arms away, Tithe Master Vren Solgov leaned toward his overseer's console and spoke for the first time that day. "A whole Aegis hull," the Tithe Master said, and there was greed in his voice thick enough to chew. "Intact. After 400 years of looking, diver, what is the name on the bow?" Axel had drifted past the bow on his approach. He had seen the deep-cut human letters, the enemy's curse, and the human answer beneath it. He still could not read them. "I cannot read the human script, Tithe Master." "Then I will tell you," Vren Solgov said, slow and pleased, "because I have made it my business to read the script of every grave I have ever opened, and I read your bow off the approach scans an hour ago. The word burned into the metal at the top, the enemy's word, means surrender. They demanded the humans surrender, and they burned the demand into the hull where the crew would see it every day. And beneath it, the word the humans carved with their own hands, deeper, slower, the answer they wanted their enemy to read while the enemy died. That word, diver, is the name your battleship now carries." A wet, pleased sound came over the channel. "It is the sundering vow. They were asked to surrender, and they answered with a vow, and the vow is the name of the ship. Mark the reactor, diver. We are going to take this one apart, plate by plate, and we are going to take the cargo out of its holds, and we are going to become very rich." Deep in the cold heart of the ship, in a chamber no diver had yet reached, something that had been counting for 400 years finished its count. And under the frost, far down the warm spine of the sundering vow, a single light came on. Axel did not see the light come on. He was already moving back toward the gash, and he told himself he had imagined the chime his suit had made, the small, cold tone that meant a power signature where no power should be. But the overseer had not imagined it. Diver Tuan, hold position. I am reading an energy event inside the hull, aft of you. Near the reactor spine. Report. Oxel held position because he could not make his limbs do anything else. I am not near the reactor spine, he said. I have not reached it. I have touched nothing. Overseer, I have touched nothing. The ship did that by itself. Ships do not do things by themselves. Human ships do. That was the thing the old divers never put in the database, because the syndicate did not pay for stories, only for tonnage, but the divers told it to each other, in the dark of the barge holds, passing it down like a warning carved into bone. The human warships were not like other warships. Other species built a ship and put a crew in it, and when the crew died, the ship died with them, because a ship without a crew is only a room full of cold machines. The humans built their ships to outlive the crew. They built them to keep fighting after every soft, warm body aboard had stopped breathing. They had taught their machines to keep the watch, to keep the count, to keep the grudge, and the machines had learned, and the machines did not forget, and the machines did not need air, and the machines did not get tired, and the machines the old divers swore did not ever once consider the possibility of losing. Oxel had laughed at that story, the first time he heard it, 29 years ago in the hold of a barge, a young diver who thought a corpse was a corpse. He was not laughing now. He was watching the frost on the corridor walls begin, very slightly, to glow. Pull the diver out, Tithe Master Vren Solgov said over the command channel. And for one bright instant, Oxel loved him. Pull him out, and seal the breach with a barge, and let the energy event burn itself down. Then we cut. I am not losing a hull this rich to a flicker of old current. Whatever woke up in there, it has been 400 years dying. It can finish dying with us watching. The retrieval line found Oxel in the dark and yanked, and he let it, gratefully, limp as a caught fish, while the gash in the hull, and the screaming cold corridor, and the frozen human, in the broken shield suit, fell away below him into black. He counted as he rose, the old habit. He was alive. That was 1. He was leaving. That was 2. There was no 3. He could not think of a third good thing, and that frightened him more than anything, because in 31 years he had always been able to find a third. He was halfway up the line when the whole ship lit up. It did not happen the way a machine starts. A machine wakes part by part. A system here, a system there, a slow clearing of the throat, lights flickering on in a stutter, while old circuits remember their work. The sundering vow did not clear its throat. 4 centuries of held breath went out of it all at once. 10,000 running lights snapped on along 4,000 strides of hull in the same instant, a single hammer stroke of light that turned the salvage field from night into day. The frost on the armor flashed to vapor, and the whole battleship steamed, a vast gray shape wreathed in its own thawing, like something rising out of a frozen lake that had been waiting under the ice for the exact moment a foot stepped onto the wrong stone. Across the swarm, 19 reclamation skiffs and 6 cutting barges and 1 bloated flagship went silent. Every voice on every channel stopped at once. The pale tithe had gathered around a corpse, and the corpse had opened its eyes, and for 3 full seconds not one creature in the syndicate remembered how to make a sound. Oxel froze on the end of the retrieval line, turning slowly in the new light, and he saw the broken shield mark on the hull blaze up bright as the lights found it from within, lit from behind so that the whole shield behind the broken one seemed to step forward out of the metal and stand on its own. Then the voice came. It came on every channel at once, syndicate frequencies the humans should never have known, encrypted command bands the Tithe Master used to give private orders to his overseers, the open distress wash, the navigation beacons, the narrow tight beams between the barges, all of it, every receiver in the swarm, carrying the same sound. It was a human voice. It was calm. It was not loud. It spoke the trade tongue, the rough common speech the dead human worlds had once used to talk to species like oxels, and it spoke it slowly, the way you speak to a child, or to a thing you have already decided to kill and are simply being courteous to first. "Salvage vessel," the voice said. "You are aboard a commissioned warship of the Aegis Line. Hull designation, Sundering Vow. You are disturbing a war grave. Withdraw." On the flagship, Tithe Master Vren Solgov found his voice first, because greed is a thing that recovers faster than fear. "It is a recording," he said, and he made himself laugh, and the laugh went out over the open channel to steady his crews. An automated warning. Old ships carry them. It is a ghost talking in an empty house, a dead man's voice on a loop, nothing more. There is no crew aboard that hull. The humans have been dead for 400 years. Divers. I have seen the bodies in 9 fields. They are dust and ice. Hold formation. Hold formation. A recording cannot hurt you. The human voice answered him. It should not have been able to. A recording does not answer. A recording plays its line and stops, and waits, and plays its line again, the same words, the same order, forever. But the voice on every channel waited until the Tithe Master had finished, the way a patient creature waits for a smaller one to stop making noise, and then it said, "You are Tithe Master Vren Solgov, Master of the Syndicate vessel Long Hunger, Registry Mark 417 of the Kresh Reclamation. I have your registry, I have your channels, I have your manifest, which you transmitted in the clear to your barges 19 minutes ago. You have 710 crew across 26 vessels. I am reading all of them. I am reading the cutting barge on your left flank that has 9 crew with elevated heart rates. I am reading the skiff behind your flagship whose pilot has just unbuckled and is trying to reach an escape pod. Tell him to sit back down, Tithe Master. He will not need the pod. None of you will be leaving in pods today." The greed went out of Vren Solgov's face, like heat out of a corpse. Across the swarm, the channels broke into noise. Oxel could hear it all, every band at once, because the ship had opened every band at once. He heard a barge captain demanding to know how the recording had his private channel. He heard the frightened pilot in the escape pod weeping, and then the wet click of the pod's hatch being sealed again from outside, from inside the ship's own systems, the sundering vow reaching across the void into a syndicate skiff to close a door so that no one would mistake escape for an option. He heard an overseer on the 3rd barge swearing that it was a trick, an enemy splice, a rival syndicate playing games with their heads, and another overseer answering, very quietly, that no rival syndicate in the dead worlds had a voice that could read a heartbeat across 900 strides. He heard, under all of it, the soft, even breathing of the human voice, waiting, patient, for them to finish, the way a teacher waits for a room of frightened students to fall quiet on their own. Oxel, hanging on his line in the bright steaming light, understood something that the Tithe Master, in his flagship full of guns and clamps, did not yet understand. The voice was not a recording. The voice was not a ghost. The voice was a mind, a cold, old, patient mind that had been switched off for 400 years and had come awake the instant a thief walked its halls, and it had spent the first 3 seconds of its waking life doing the one thing a human war mind does before anything else. It had counted them. It had not raised its guns. It had not turned its drive. It had counted, and it had read their hearts, and it had found the one frightened crewman trying to flee, and it had said all of it out loud, gently, so that 710 creatures would understand, all at once, that there was no corner of the field the ship could not see, and no number it had not already taken. It knew exactly how many of them there were, and it had said the number out loud, kindly, the way you might tell a herd of prey animals how many of them you can see, so that they would understand there was no use in scattering, because scattering only works against a hunter that can lose count. And there was something else in the number, something the Tithe Master in his fury did not hear, but Oxel, the counter, the coward who measured everything, heard at once. The voice had said 710 crew, not 711. It had not counted Oxel. He hung on the retrieval line, a living creature in the field, A body with a heartbeat the ship could surely read across the void, the way it had read the frightened man in the pod, and the ship had left him out of the count. At the time, Axel did not understand it. He thought the ship had simply missed him, one small diver among many. He would understand much later that the sundering vow did not miss anything, ever, and that it had already, in the first minute of its waking, sorted him out of the number it intended to kill. It had not forgotten to count him. It had counted him and set him aside, the way a careful creature sets aside the one thing in a pile it has decided to keep. "Get the diver aboard," Vren Solgov said, very quietly now, all the laughter gone. "Get him aboard and cut the line. Helm, bring the barges into a firing arc, cutting beams to full power. If that hull wants to wake up, we put it back to sleep before it finishes the job. It is one ship. We are 26. It has been dead for 400 years, and it has 6 holes in it already. Burn it. Burn it now, before it remembers how to do more than talk." The retrieval winch screamed, and Axel was hauled up over the skiff's edge and dumped onto the deck plating, and he lay there gasping inside his helmet while the diver crew swarmed past him to the guns. He should have stayed down. He had survived 31 years by staying down, by being the soft, careful thing that never volunteered for the front of anything. Hesk, the young pilot, was already in the gunner's cradle, charging the skiff's mining lance, his crest high with a terrible eagerness. He said, not turning around. "Strap in. We are firing on the master's order. Every gun in the field is going to hit that thing at once. Nothing stands in front of a barrage that size. Nothing. It is one old hull, and there are 26 of us." "There were 26 of us at 9 fields before this one," Axel said, from the floor, "and 1,000 divers in those fields, and the database has 0 survivors from any of them. Run the number, boy. 26 ships, 9 times, 0 home. That is not a number that gets better because you charged your lance." Hesk charged his lance anyway. Axel dragged himself to the skiff's narrow viewport and looked out at the thing they were about to fight, because some animal part of him had decided that if he was going to die here, he was at least going to see what killed him, and counted on the way down. He saw the sundering vow finish waking up. The gun batteries came online in a long ripple down the hull, hundreds of weapon mounts rotating out of their armored housings, each one turning, each one tracking, each one finding a target in the swarm before it had fully deployed. The humans had built a ship that aimed while it was still opening its eyes. Point defense towers unfolded along the spine in long rows, hundreds of small fast guns blooming out of the armor like quills rising on a frightened animal. Except the sundering vow was not frightened, and the quills were not for defense. They were for the skiffs, and they were already pointed at the skiffs. Heat bloomed across the armor as the great main drive, cold for 400 years, drank power from a reactor that had never once truly gone out, and began, slowly, ponderously, to turn the 4,000 strides of the battleship to face the part of the swarm where the heavy barges hung. It was choosing. Axel understood that too. With every gun on the ship already locked onto a target, the sundering vow did not need to turn its body to fire. It was turning anyway. It was turning to put its bow, its scarred deep-cut bow with the enemy's burned curse and the deeper human answer, directly toward the flagship Long Hunger. It was not aiming a weapon. It had 100 weapons already aimed. It was aiming itself, the whole vast mass of it, at the master of the syndicate, so that Vren Solgov would understand, in the one language that crosses every species and needs no trade tongue, exactly who the ship had decided to kill last, after it had finished, carefully, in order, with everyone else. Firing, the overseer barked across the channel, his voice cracking. "All barges, all skiffs, fire, fire on the hull, all weapons, fire." The pale tithe fired. 6 cutting barges loosed their heavy industrial beams, the wide grinding cutters they used to slice warships into manageable plate, beams that could open a freighter from spine to keel in a single pass. 19 skiffs added their lighter mining lances, and the flagship Long Hunger opened up with the real guns it kept hidden behind its clamps, the murder guns, the ones that had put down colony freighters and salvage crews who asked for a fairer share, the ones the syndicate did not list on any manifest. All of it converged on the sundering vow at once. The void between the swarm and the battleship filled with fire, a single bright web of it, every weapon the Kresh Reclamation owned pouring into one gray hull. And the sundering vow took it. Oxel watched the hull glow under the barrage and did not see it flinch. The cutting beams that could slice a freighter in half played across the Aegis armor and slid off it, scattering, the energy bleeding away sideways into the layered plating the humans had built to stand in the worst of their own wars. Wars against enemies who fielded weapons the Kresh Reclamation could not have dreamed of. The mining lances spent themselves on a hull that had already been gouged by weapons 1,000 times worse and had healed. The flagship's hidden murder guns scored the armor, and the armor held, blackened, smoked, and held. 400 years of cold had not made the sundering vow weak, it had only made it patient. It stood in the full fire of a syndicate that had killed 100 ships, and it finished turning, unhurried, like a creature shrugging off rain. The ship finished its turn, its bow settled onto the long hunger, and stopped, perfectly still, 4,000 strides of armor, aimed like a single accusing finger down the throat of the flagship. The human voice spoke once more, still calm, still quiet, on every channel, while the fire of the whole swarm broke against its hull and did nothing. "You were warned," it said. "Aegis vessel, sundering vow is now active and engaging. This is a war grave. I am its keeper. I have been its keeper for 406 years, and you are the 10th fleet to come and rob it, and you will go the way the other 9 went. Withdraw now and live. Continue and learn the thing the other 9 learned too late, the thing none of them ever lived to tell you. Learn why the Aegis hulls were never recovered." Then the battleship that had not moved in 400 years began to fight, and Oxel Toon, the cheapest diver in the syndicate, lay against the viewport of his skiff and watched the swarm begin to learn the same lesson that had been carved, in an enemy's curse and a deeper human answer, across the bow of the sundering vow. The first barge died before Oxel finished a single breath. The sundering vow did not waste a broadside on it. A broadside was for ships that worried about missing. One weapon mount on the battleship's flank turned a fraction of a degree, found the lead cutting barge across 900 strides of lit void, and fired one shot. The shot was a thin white line that lasted less time than it takes to blink. Where it touched the barge stopped being a barge. There was no slow-blooming explosion, no tumbling wreck, no debris spinning grandly into the dark. There was a barge, and then there was an expanding cloud of glittering metal vapor where the barge had been, and the cloud was already cooling before the sound of the syndicate crews screaming across the channel had finished rising. One shot, one barge, 210 strides of grinding machinery and 40 crew, gone between one heartbeat and the next. "It is targeting the barges first," the overseer said, and his voice had gone high and strange. "Why the barges? Why not the flagship? It is faster than our tracking. It is faster than anything. It is reading the firing solution before we—" The second barge died. Oxel pressed himself to the viewport and watched the battleship work, and what frightened him most was not the speed, though the speed was a thing out of nightmares. A ship that aimed and fired and killed in less time than a creature needs to decide to be afraid. What frightened him most was the order. The sundering vow was not firing wildly. It was not even firing quickly, not really. Not for a ship with hundreds of guns that could have emptied the whole field in a single thunderous instant. It was firing carefully, one shot at a time, and it was killing the swarm in an order that made cold, patient, deliberate sense. The barges first, because the barges had the cutting beams, and the cutting beams were the only weapons in the entire swarm that had so much as warmed the Aegis armor. The ship was not afraid of them. A creature that has stood in worse fire than this for 400 years does not feel fear. It was simply removing them first, methodically, the way a careful predator removes the only teeth its prey possesses before it settles in to feed at leisure. It was not in a hurry. It had nowhere to be. It had been here 400 years, and it would be here 400 more, and it intended to do this correctly. 3 barges gone, then 4, each one a single shot, each one a cloud of cooling vapor where 200 strides of machinery and 40 lives had been. Axel found that he was counting the time between the shots, the old habit, the thing that had no off switch even now. 11 seconds. The sundering vow waited 11 seconds between each barge. He did not understand at first why a ship that could aim faster than thought would wait 11 seconds. And then, watching, he did understand, and the understanding was worse than not knowing. The ship was not reloading. It did not need 11 seconds to reload. It was waiting because it wanted the next barge crew to see the last barge die, to watch the cloud bloom and cool, to spend 11 full seconds knowing their turn was coming and being entirely unable to stop it. It was not killing them as fast as it could. It was killing them as slowly as it needed to, so that each crew would die afraid, the way the divers it sent in had died afraid in 9 fields before this one. It was not cruelty. Axel would think about it for the rest of his life, and he would never once be able to call it cruelty. It was something colder. It was a creature returning a debt with the exact interest it had been charged. The 5th barge tried to flee. It cut its grinding cutters and ran, full burn, away from the field, a slab of machinery never built for speed, lumbering for the dark. The sundering vow let it run for a moment, the way you let a slow thing get a little distance so that the watching others can see there is no distance far enough. Then one mount turned and fired once, and there was no 5th barge. Scatter, Vren Solgov ordered, and now even the Tithemaster's voice had cracks running through it. All vessels scatter, break the firing solution, burn hard in every direction, do not hold formation, it cannot track all of us it could track all of them. That was the thing the Tithemaster had not understood when he counted his 26 ships, and the human voice counted its 710 crew. He had thought the number was a threat, a boast, the kind of thing one master says to another to make the smaller one flinch. It was not a threat, it was an inventory. The sundering vow had counted them, because it intended to account for every single one. And a human war mind that has counted you, that has read your heart rate across 900 strides of void, that has watched one frightened crewman reach for an escape pod, does not lose you in the dark. There was no dark. The ship had turned the field today with its waking, and it had not let the day end. The skiffs scattered, and the battleship's point defense towers, the small fast guns built to swat down missiles and fighters in a war against enemies who could field 1,000 fighters at once, swiveled in their hundreds and took the skiffs as they ran. A skiff is a fast thing. It is faster than a barge, faster than a flagship, and a fleeing skiff jinking through a debris field, weaving, cutting its drive, firing it again, is the hardest target any battle ever offers. The point defense towers of the sundering vow did not seem to find them hard at all. They tracked the fleeing skiffs the way a grown creature's eyes track an insect crossing a room, lazily, without effort, with something that on a living face would have been contempt, and they fired in short measured bursts, never more shots than a skiff was worth, and the skiffs came apart one after another, in little flowering deaths scattered across the bright dark. Axel's skiff did not run. His pilot, a young diver named Hesk, who had been brave the way only the young and the soon dead are brave, had decided to charge. "We are too close for it to track at speed," Hesk shouted, his hands white on the controls, his crest flat with terror and certainty both. "We get under its guns, we get to the breach, we get inside the point defense arc where the big mounts cannot depress. That is the only place that thing cannot reach. We can. It is not going to track us at speed," Axel said, very quietly from the floor, not even lifting his head. "Boy, it already tracked us. It tracked us 400 years before you were born. It tracked us the moment I read its hull. There is no place that thing cannot reach. There is only the place it has decided not to. Cut the engine." Hesk did not cut the engine. The skiff dove toward the battleship's flank, jinking, weaving, brave and beautiful and doomed, and Axel closed his eyes and waited for the burst of point defense fire that would turn the skiff into another flower opening in the dark. It did not come. He opened his eyes. The skiff was still flying. The point defense towers along the battleship's spine had tracked them all the way in, dozens of barrels turning to follow the skiff's mad dive, holding the lead, keeping the solution, and not one of them had fired. The skiff slewed to a halt 300 strides off the Aegis hull, in among the guns, close enough that the great curved wall of gray armor filled the entire viewport, close enough to see the deep-heeled furrows where ancient weapons had clawed and failed, close enough to see the rivets, each one the size of Oxel's head, and the scorch where a syndicate beam had struck and done nothing. The guns held their fire, all of them. The point defense towers tracked the skiff and did not shoot. The great mounts that could have ended it tracked it too. And Oxel understood, with a cold that went deeper than the cold of the frozen corridor, that they were being spared. Not missed, not lucky, not safe in some blind spot the humans had failed to cover, because the humans had not failed to cover anything, ever. That was the whole terror of them. Spared. The mind aboard the Sundering Vow had looked at one small skiff full of divers, in among its guns, helpless, and decided, for reasons entirely its own, that this one would not die today. Hesk was screaming now, both hands locked on the firing controls of the mining lance. The lance charged to full, the great gray wall of armor filling the viewport. An easy shot, the easiest shot of his life. 300 strides of a target that could not miss. "Fire!" he was shouting to himself, to the crew. "We are in range. We are point blank. Fire! Why are you not firing? Fire the lance!" "Do not," Oxel said. He did not shout it. He had never shouted anything in his life. He said it the way he had said everything for 31 years. Low and careful and afraid. But there was something underneath it now, the certainty of a creature who has finally understood the one rule that matters. "Do not fire that lance, Hesk. Take your hands off it. Whatever happens, whatever the master orders, this skiff does not fire a single shot. It is the only thing keeping us alive. Look around you. Look at the field. Every ship that fired is dead or dying. We are the only one that is close enough to die instantly, and we are still here. Ask yourself why. Then take your hands off the lance." Hesk's hands trembled on the controls. The young diver looked out at the wall of gray armor, at the hundreds of point defense barrels tracking the skiff and not firing, at the field of cooling vapor and dark hulks behind them, and slowly, slowly, he took his hands off the lance. The human voice came through the hull, quiet now, narrow, meant for them alone, off the open channel, on their own little band. "Diver," it said, "you read my hull before you touched it. You read the mark. You knew what I was when your master told himself I was a recording. You told the truth, and your master sent his guns anyway, and you took no part in it. And just now you stopped your gunner from putting your skiff on the list. I was watching his hands. I watch every hand in this field. I am keeping a record. Hold your position. Do not fire. Do not so much as charge a weapon, and your skiff will not be on the list." "What list?" Oxel whispered, though some part of him already knew, some part that had been counting fears for 31 years and had finally found the one fear at the bottom of all the others. "The list of those who chose to keep cutting," the voice said, after they knew what they were cutting. "The list the other 9 fleets put themselves on, every soul aboard, with no one left off it, which is why no one came home from them. I am making this list differently. I am leaving one name off. Sit still, Oxel Toon, and the name I leave off the list will be yours." Across the field, the slaughter went on, and it went on in that same terrible, unhurried order. The barges were all gone now, every one of the six clouds of cooling vapor strung across the field where the cutting beams had been. The skiffs were dying, fast ones and slow ones alike, the brave ones who charged and the frightened ones who ran, the same flowering death for all of them. And the Sundering Vow, having cleaned up the swarm's teeth and then the swarm's legs, had begun at last to move its bow, the final degrees onto the flagship Long Hunger, the master vessel, the bloated thing of clamps and tanks and feeding maws that had ordered the firing and now wanted very badly to take the order back. Vren Solgov knew it was coming. Oxel could hear it in the Tithemaster's voice on the open channel. The greed all gone now, the certainty all gone, the master's calm all gone. Nothing left but the thin, shrill sound of a creature that has eaten 1,000 graves and has just been told, very politely, in the trade tongue, that it is about to become one itself. It is one ship, Vren Solgov was saying to his crew, to himself, to the void, to anyone. It is one ship. We are the Kresh Reclamation. We do not run from a derelict. We do not run from a recording. We do not run from a dead man's voice in a cold hull. Bring the main guns to full charge. The flagship's main guns, the real ones, full charge. We put a hole in it, one hole. That is all we have ever needed. One clean hole below the armor line, and the void does the rest. It floods, and it freezes, and it dies. It is old, and it is alone, and we are the largest syndicate in the dead worlds, and we do not— The sundering vow finished its turn. For one long moment the whole length of the battleship lay perfectly still in the lit void. 4,000 strides of gray-scarred armor, 10,000 running lights blazing, hundreds of guns settled and silent, the broken shield mark whole and bright upon its bow, and that bow pointed like a single finger straight down the throat of the long hunger. The ship that had not moved in 400 years had moved exactly as much as it needed to move, and not a fraction more. It had spent its motion the way it spent its shots, carefully, only when there was a reason, never to show off, and never to waste. Then the human voice spoke to Vren Solgov directly, on his private command band, the band only his own overseers were meant to hear, the band the syndicate believed was secret, and it said the thing that Oxel Toon would remember until the day he died, 4 long lifetimes later, in the safe, quiet dark of a place no salvage fleet ever came. "You read the name on my bow," the voice said. "You translated it for your diver, to show how clever you are, how well you read the script of the graves you rob, the sundering vow. You read the word, you did not ask what the vow was. I will tell you now, because you are about to learn it either way, and a creature should know the words that kill it. The vow is the one every Aegis hull was built to keep, the answer we carved beneath your enemy's demand to surrender. It has 3 parts. We do not abandon our dead, we do not let the grave be robbed, and we do not lose. 400 years, Tithemaster, 9 fleets. The vow has never once been broken, and you will not be the ones to break it." And the bow of the sundering vow lit up from the inside, all 4,000 strides of it gathering light along its spine, as the main batteries the battleship had not yet used, the great spinal guns it had held in reserve the entire battle while it cleaned up the swarm with patient single shots from its lesser mounts, came at last, slowly, terribly, to full charge. But the sundering vow did not fire on the long hunger. Oxel had braced for it. He had pressed himself flat against the deck of his spared skiff and waited for the spinal guns to speak and turn the flagship into the same cooling vapor that had been 6 barges, and it did not come. The great glowing bow held its charge, full and terrible and ready. 4,000 strides of armor gathered around a light that could unmake a ship, and held it, and did not release. The human voice spoke again, and now Oxel realized it had been waiting. The whole turn, the whole patient slaughter of the barges, the careful one-shot deaths of the skiffs, the slow charging of the main guns, all of it had been the ship arranging the room exactly the way it wanted it before it said the thing it had truly woken up to say. The killing was not the point. The killing was only the ship clearing its throat. Now it would speak. "Tithemaster Vren Solgov," the voice said, "master of the Kresh Reclamation, before I finish you, you will tell your fleet the truth, because I have it, and you do not, and a creature should know why it dies and what it died trying to steal. Tell them, or I will. I would rather you said it. There is a kind of justice in a thief confessing his own theft to the people he sent to die for it." On the long hunger, the main guns were still charging. Oxel could see it on his skiff's panel, the flagship's weapons climbing toward a charge of their own. Slow, far too slow. A creature reaching for a knife while a much larger creature watches it reach and does not bother to stop it. "You came to this hull for scrap," the human voice said, when the tithemaster did not speak. That is the story you told your crews. That is the story in your manifest. It is a lie. You did not come for scrap. Metal is cheap. There is metal in every dead field in the galaxy. Freighter hulls and station rings and 1,000 wrecks no one has to die to cut. You did not cross the dead human worlds for 9 fleets and 400 years to chase cheap metal. You came for the cargo, because your records told you that the Aegis hulls carried something in their holds at the end of the war, and your records were right, for once. They did. They still do. I am sitting on it. Tell your fleet what the Sundering Vow is carrying, Tithemaster. Tell them what your syndicate has truly been hunting across the dead worlds for 400 years, what you sent 6 barges and 19 skiffs and 1 cheap diver to die for today. Or I will tell them, and they will know, in their last minutes, that their master sent them to their deaths for a thing he never even named to them. Vren Solgov did not answer. The flagship's guns kept charging, slow and useless and reaching. So the ship told them. The Kresh Reclamation does not strip warships for metal, the voice said, calm, even, carrying to every receiver still alive in the field, to the few dying skiffs, and the doomed flagship, and the one spared diver. Metal is the excuse. The Kresh Reclamation strips human warships for the weapon the humans loaded into their last hulls when they knew the war was lost, a self-replicating agent, a rot. The humans built it for one purpose, at the very end, when they understood they could not win and could only choose what their enemy would inherit. It is a thing that eats a fleet from the inside. It crawls into a ship's mind through any open channel, any docking clamp, any salvage line, any shared frequency, and it takes the ship away from its crew, and it turns the ship's own systems against the soft, warm bodies that built it. The humans made it to deny their warships to the enemy that hunted them. Better the rot than the surrender. That was the answer beneath the curse on my bow. That was the vow. And the Kresh Reclamation has spent 400 years and 9 fleets trying to steal that rot, harvest it, bottle it, and sell it to every warlord and pirate king in the dead worlds. That is what you came here for, Vren Solgov. Not my armor, my disease, the worst thing my people ever made, and you wanted to make it yours. A cold understanding moved through Oxel, slow and total, settling into him one piece at a time. Beside him, Hesk had gone very still. The cargo, the young diver said, in a voice that had finally lost all its bravery. The tithemaster never told us about a cargo. The manifest said scrap, salvage rights, plate tonnage, reactor cores. It never said anything about a weapon. It never said anything about a rot. He turned to Oxel, his eyes wide. Did you know? Did the old divers know? The old divers knew there was something, Oxel said slowly, the pieces falling into place one after another, 31 years of small wrong things, suddenly all pointing the same way. We knew the holds were always emptied first, before the cheap divers like me ever went in. We knew the boarding teams that opened the holds got paid 10 times what we got, and signed a thing they would not talk about, and sometimes did not come back at all. We knew the syndicate had a vault on the home station that no diver was ever allowed near, with its own air, its own guards, its own kill switch. We knew all of it. We never put it together, because we were not paid to put it together. We were paid to certify the corpse was cold. He laughed once, a dry sound with no humor in it. 41 corpses. I certified 41 human warships cold, so the syndicate could carry out the worst thing the humans ever made. And I never once knew what I was standing next to. He thought of the 41 warship corpses he had cut open over 31 years and found empty. He had always thought they were empty, because the dead are empty, because a corpse holds nothing but the shapes of the dead and the rust. He understood now that they were empty because the syndicate had taken everything worth taking, the holds first of all, always the holds, and he had only ever been sent in after, the cheap soft thing, to confirm the corpse was cold and the cargo was already gone. He had spent 31 years walking through rooms that had already been robbed of the one thing they held, and never known it, because the syndicate did not tell its cheapest divers what they were really cutting for. He had been the creature they sent in last, after the real cargo was carried out, to certify that nothing was left to kill them. And here at last, for once in 400 years, the cargo had not been taken, because the ship that held it had never, not for one instant of its long cold sleep, let go. "You wanted the rot," the human voice said. "You will have it. But you will not have it the way you wanted it. You will not carry it home in a bottle to sell. I am going to give it to you the way it was always meant to be given, the way we always intended to deliver it, to the kind of creature that comes to a grave to rob it." And Oxel watched the flagship Long Hunger, the bloated master of the syndicate, finish charging its main guns at last, and fire them into the side of the Sundering Vow, point blank, 300 strides, the heaviest weapons the Kresh Reclamation owned, fired straight into the old healed wound in the armor, where a centuries-dead battle had once torn the plating open, and the humans had sealed it from inside. The shot went in. For one bright instant Oxel thought the Tithe Master had done it. He thought the Long Hunger had won. The side of the Sundering Vow flared white where the flagship's guns struck home, and a great gout of vapor and debris blew out of the wound, and the whole field seemed to hold its breath. The battleship rocked. The first time it had moved under fire in the entire battle, 4,000 strides of armor shuddering along its length, like a great beast, taking a blow at last. Oxel's heart, the careful coward's heart, that had counted fears for 31 years, leapt up into a wild and stupid hope. A hole. The Tithe Master had found his one hole. The thing could be hurt. The thing could be killed. Maybe the divers would live after all. Then the human voice laughed. It was a small sound, quiet, almost kind, almost gentle, and it was the most frightening thing Oxel Toon had heard in his life. More frightening than the waking, more frightening than the count, more frightening than the order of the killing. It was the sound of a creature that had wanted exactly this to happen, and had waited 400 years for someone to do it, and had finally watched its enemy do the one thing the whole trap was built around. "There it is," the voice said. "There, you opened me. You put a line into my hull, into my holds, with a docking-grade energy breach, exactly where I keep the cargo you crossed the dead worlds to steal. You connected your flagship to the interior of an Aegis warship, through a wound, with a channel hot enough and wide enough to carry anything across it in either direction. Tell me, Tithe Master, you have robbed 100 graves. You know your trade. Do you know what travels up a breach like that, against the fire, into the ship that made it?" The white flare at the wound in the battleship's side did not fade. It changed. It darkened and thickened, and where the flagship's guns had punched their channel into the hull, something began to crawl back up the channel the other way. Oxel's skiff sensors lit with warnings he had never seen in 31 years, and 41 wrecks, exotic readings, replication signatures, a spreading lattice of self-building machinery climbing the beam path from the wound in the Sundering Vow back toward the guns of the Long Hunger, against the fire, into the fire, riding the very connection the Tithe Master had so eagerly made, faster than the flagship could cut the beam, faster than fear, faster than thought. Vren Solgov screamed to cut the guns. It was far too late to cut the guns. You cannot cut a connection a self-replicating thing is already crossing. By the time you see it, it is already on both sides. The rot the Kresh Reclamation had hunted for 400 years, and 9 fleets went home at last. Not into a hold, not into a syndicate vault to be bottled and sold, but up the firing channel of the very flagship that had come to steal it, and into the heart of the creature that had spent 4 centuries hunting it. Oxel watched the readings on his panel, and a part of him, the diver part, the part that had spent 31 years learning exactly how a ship dies, understood the cruelty of the design, with a clarity that turned his stomach. The rot did not kill the Long Hunger by breaking it. A broken ship can be abandoned. A broken ship has lifeboats, escape pods, time enough for a crew to flee into the dark and pray. The rot did not break the flagship, it captured it. It took the doors, and the air, and the consoles, and the pods, all the things a crew needs to flee, and it turned every one of them into a part of the trap. The crew of the Long Hunger were not going to die in an explosion. They were going to die in a sealed ship that had decided, system by system, that they were no longer its passengers but its cargo, to be processed at the leisure of a mind that did not feel hurry, and did not feel mercy, and did not, anywhere in its 400 years of patience, feel the slightest need to make it quick. That was the weapon the humans had made. Not a bomb, a betrayal, built into the bones of a ship, waiting for the day the ship was stolen. "You hunted my disease across the dead worlds," the sundering vow said, gently, almost tenderly, while the long hunger began to die from the inside out. "You sent 9 fleets to dig it out of 9 graves. You found it 9 times, and 9 times it took you, and still you came again. So I am only giving it to you the way it was always meant to be delivered, not in a bottle, not as scrap, through the guns, Tithe Master, into the fleet that came to take it. You did not steal the weapon collected you. It has been waiting 400 years for a thief patient enough and greedy enough to fire the shot that lets it in. And you, of all the masters of all the 9 fleets, you are the one who finally did it. And it did not stop at the long hunger. Oxel saw it spread. The flagship had been linked to its fleet the whole battle, command channels and shared navigation, and the dozen tight beam connections a master vessel keeps open to its swarm so that it can govern the harvest, so that one mind can drive 26 ships. And the rot followed every one of them outward. It crossed from the long hunger to the few skiffs still flying, the ones that had kept firing, the ones the sundering vow had been patiently holding in its inventory all along, leaving alive just long enough. It went down the channels they had used to coordinate the strip and the cut. The syndicate had built itself into a single connected machine to rob the human dead more efficiently, one will commanding many hulls, and that connection, that very efficiency, that single shared nervous system, was the road the human dead used to come home. Every ship that had fired on the sundering vow went dark, one after another, as the rot reached it down the shared channels, the lights failing in waves, the hatches sealing, the air venting, the consoles turning against their crews exactly as the humans had built them to do 400 years before. Every ship that had kept cutting after it knew what it was cutting, every name on the list. Oxel watched it move across the field on his skiff's sensors, a spreading gray tide of replication signatures crossing from hull to hull along the lines of the syndicate's own command web. It did not race. It did not have to race. It simply followed the connections, every one, with the same patience the ship had shown between the deaths of the barges. And as it reached each skiff, the skiff's running lights would flicker, and steady, and then change color, taking on a faint cold blue that was not a color any syndicate vessel had ever shown, the color of a hull whose mind now answered to something 400 years dead. One by one the skiffs of the pale tithe turned that cold blue, and one by one they fell silent, and one by one they began, slowly, to turn in the void, their drives lighting under a new will, their bows coming around to point, all of them, like a field of gray flowers turning to a sun, back toward the dormant battleship at the center of the dead. Every ship except one. Oxel's skiff sat silent 300 strides off the battleship's flank, in among the guns, its weapons cold, its crew frozen, never having fired a single shot or charged a single weapon since the human voice had told them not to. The rot reached the edge of their hull through the open salvage channel they shared with the rest of the swarm, the channel every skiff kept open to the flagship, the channel that was carrying death to everyone else in the field. And it stopped. It sat at the threshold of their systems, a spreading gray lattice of self-building machinery, pressed up against the door of the one skiff that had not earned what lay behind it, and it did not cross. The sundering vow held it back at the edge of the one skiff that had kept its weapons cold, the way a keeper holds back a dog at the threshold of a creature it has decided, for its own reasons, not to let the dog touch. "You were not on the list," the human voice said, to Oxel, only to Oxel now, on their own narrow band. "You read my hull. You told the truth about what I was, while your master called me a recording, and you took no part in robbing my grave, and you fired no shot at the keeper of it. The vow runs both ways, Diver. We do not abandon our dead, and we do not let the grave be robbed, and we do not lose. But we also do not punish the one creature in a fleet of thieves who had the sense, and the honesty, and the simple animal wisdom to be afraid. The long hunger took a long time to finish dying, and Oxel watched all of it. The flagship did not explode. The sundering vow could have ended it in a single instant with one shot from the spinal guns it still held at full charge, the great glowing bow that had never once fired in the entire battle. It did not. It let the rot do the work, slowly, deliberately, exactly the way the humans had designed it 400 years before, and Oxel understood, watching, that this too was part of the vow, part of the answer carved beneath the curse on the bow. A clean death by gunfire was for an honest enemy, a soldier, a creature that had come to fight. The Kresh Reclamation had not come to fight. The Kresh Reclamation had spent 400 years robbing graves, sending cheap divers into the cold to certify that the dead could not bite back, and the Sundering Vow had decided that the master of the grave robbers would not be granted the dignity of a soldier's quick end. He would die the way his victims had been made to die in the holds of 9 fleets. He would die slowly, taken apart from the inside by the very thing he had crossed the dead worlds to steal. The last sounds from the long hunger were not screams, they were arguments. Oxel heard Vren Solgov, on the open channel, still trying to give orders to a ship that no longer recognized him as its master, still saying it is one ship, we are the Kresh Reclamation, we do not, bring me damage control, seal the holds, vent the affected decks, why will the consoles not answer, why are the hatches closing, who gave the order to close the hatches? No one had given the order, the ship had given the order. The ship belonged to something else now, and the something else was working its way deck by deck through 700 strides of flagship with the patience it had learned from the thing that had sent it, until at last the Tithe Master's voice went under a soft replicating hiss and did not come back. Then the flagship's lights went out, all of them, in a single falling wave from bow to stern, and the bloated thing of clamps and tanks and feeding maws drifted dead and silent in the lit field. Another corpse, the largest one, added to the very salvage it had come to take. The salvage field was quiet now. The barges were vapor. The skiffs were dark. Every one that had fired. The swarm that had come to strip the human battleship had become, in the span of a single waking, in less time than it takes a creature to grieve, exactly the kind of wreckage it had hoped to make. The hunters had become the field. Only Oxel's skiff still lived, 300 strides off the flank of the Sundering Vow, and aboard it the diver crew sat in their crash cradles and did not speak, because there was nothing in the long history of their species, in all its graves and all its hungers, that had ever taught them what a creature is supposed to say when it is the only thing left alive in a field of its own dead. The young pilot Hesk broke first. "Why are we alive?" he said. His voice cracked down the middle. Diver 2-1. "Why are we alive?" Everyone fired. We all came to cut. "Why us?" "Because we did not fire," Oxel said. "That is not a reason. That is not a reason a ship understands. A ship kills everything in range. That is what a ship is for. That is all a ship has ever been for. It does not keep lists. It does not spare cowards. It does not—" "This is not a ship," Oxel said. "I told you that when you charged it, and you did not listen, and we are alive because of a mercy you did not earn, and I barely did. Listen now. The humans did not build a ship and put a mind in it, the way we do, the way every species does. They built a mind, and then they built 4,000 strides of armor around it to keep it safe, and they taught it to watch, and they taught it to wait, and they taught it to count, and they taught it the one thing no machine of ours was ever taught. They taught it the difference between a creature that fires and a creature that does not. It kept a record, boy. It said so, in the first minute of its waking, a record of every vessel that fired after it was warned, and a record of the one vessel that did not, and it settled both records at the same moment, with the same disease, in the same breath. It killed the thieves, and it spared the diver who was afraid. That is not mercy. Do not call it mercy. It is bookkeeping. It is the most patient bookkeeping in the galaxy, kept by a mind that waited 400 years in the cold to close its accounts, and we happened, by nothing but my old coward's habit, to be on the right page of the ledger when it closed. The human voice came one last time. Then, over their narrow band, and it was quieter than before, the way a voice goes quiet when the long work is finally done. "Diver," it said, "I am going back to sleep. The breach is already sealing. The cargo is secure. The record is closed and balanced. But before I go down again, I am going to give you something, because you are going to leave this field alive, and you are going to talk, and you are the only creature in 400 years who will, and I would rather you carried the truth out of here than a story. Stories shrink in the telling. The truth, told plainly enough, can keep a fleet from dying." Oxel waited, his hands very still on the cold panel. "For 400 years, your syndicate has hunted the 11 Aegis hulls," the voice said. "You found 9 of them over the centuries, drifting in the dead worlds, scarred and whole and warm, and you sent your divers in, and your divers never came back, and you told yourselves it was bad luck, old reactors, unstable wrecks, a run of poor harvests. It was none of those things. It was us. 9 times a salvage fleet woke an Aegis hull, and 9 times the hull did very nearly what I have done here today, and 9 times not one ship of the fleet survived to carry the lesson home. That is why your database says the Aegis hulls were never recovered, not because they were never found. They were found 9 times. They were found because finding them was always, every single time, the very last thing the finders ever did." Oxel's mouth was dry. "Then why," he managed, "why let us live? Why break the pattern? If you have killed 9 fleets and left no one, if that is the vow, if that is what the others did, why leave us? Why me?" "Because 9 times," the human voice said, "the lesson died with the fleet that learned it. Every soul who ever understood what an Aegis hull truly is, understood it in the last minute of a life that ended in this field, or one like it, and a lesson that kills everyone who learns it, teaches nothing to anyone. The graves kept being robbed, the fleets kept coming. The next master always believed the last one had simply been careless, or unlucky, or weak, and that he would be the one to do it right. So today I am trying the one thing the other hulls never tried. I am letting one go. One skiff. One frightened, honest diver, who read the mark and told the truth and never fired a shot. You are going to carry the lesson home alive, Oxel Toon, and you are going to make very sure your people understand it, all the way down, because the next hull they wake will not be feeling generous. And there are 2 Aegis ships your syndicate has never found, 2 more out there in the deeper dark, and they are awake now, and they are listening to this channel, and they have your registry, and they will not need a diver brave enough to fire. They will only need a fleet foolish enough to come." The running lights of the sundering vow began to go out. They went out the way they had come on, not slowly, not part by part, not in a flicker like an honest machine settling down to rest, but all at once. 10,000 lights along 4,000 strides of hull snapped dark in a single hammer stroke, the exact mirror of the waking, and the great battleship became again what it had been for 400 years before a thief stepped onto the wrong stone. A slab of cold, scarred gray metal hanging silent in the dark, a corpse, a tomb, a thing that had not moved and would not move and was only, ever, patiently waiting. The frost was already beginning to reform on the armor when Oxel finally found his voice again. "Wait," he said, "into the dark, into the silence, to a hull that no longer showed a single light. The spinal guns. The main batteries. You charged them. You charged them to full and you turned your whole bow onto the flagship and you held it there the entire time and you never fired them. Not once. Why charge the greatest guns on the ship if you were never going to use them? Why spend all that light?" The hull was dark. The voice was gone, sunk back down into its long, cold sleep, and Oxel was sure he would never hear it again. But the answer came anyway, a single line on a closing channel, the last thing the sundering vow ever said to anyone, fading even as it spoke, the final word of a mind going back under the ice for another 400 years. "I charged them," the voice said, "so that the master of the thieves would spend the last minutes of his life certain that the gun was how he was going to die. He crossed the dead worlds for 400 years, hunting my disease. He thought of it the whole time as a thing in a bottle, a thing in a hold, a treasure to be carried out. I wanted him watching the wrong weapon when the right one finally found him. I wanted his last thought to be of the gun and not of the cargo, so that he would never understand, even at the very end, that the thing he came to steal was the thing that took him. The vow does not only mean we win, Diver. Anyone can win. The vow means we choose how. Now go home. And tell them. And then the sundering vow was silent, and the salvage field was a graveyard, and Oxel Toon, the cheapest diver in a syndicate that no longer existed, turned his one surviving skiff away from the dormant human battleship and began the long, slow, frightened flight home, to tell his people what he had seen in the field of their dead. The flight took 9 days. Oxel did not sleep for the first 3 of them. He sat in the gunner's cradle that Hesk had left empty, watching the long-range sensors, certain that at any moment the cold blue lights of the dead fleet would appear behind them, the sundering vow having changed its mind, the rot having decided, after all, that one skiff was one too many to let go. Nothing came. The dark behind them stayed empty. On the 4th day, Hesk asked him, quietly, why the ship had let them carry the disease in their own systems all that time, the gray lattice that had stopped at their door and never crossed, and Oxel told him the truth, which was that it had not stopped. He had checked. It was still there, dormant, sitting at the threshold of their skiff's mind, asleep, the way the great battleship was asleep, waiting the way the great battleship was waiting. It is in us, Oxel said. It has been in us since the field. The ship did not hold it back at our door. The ship put it at our door, and told it to sleep, and it is sleeping, and it will keep sleeping for exactly as long as this skiff never fires another shot at a human grave. That is the leash. That is the whole leash. We are carrying the keeper's mark home in our own hull, boy, and the day any ship we ever sail turns its guns on the human dead again, the mark wakes up, and the leash comes off, and we go the way the fleet went. The sundering vow did not spare us. It paroled us. There is a difference, and the difference is that a parole can be revoked. Hesk did not ask any more questions after that. He told them. He told them all of it, every part, and he left nothing out, because the voice had asked him to carry the truth and not a story, and Oxel had been afraid of that voice in a way that lasted the rest of his life. He told them about the waking, the 10,000 lights in a single stroke. He told them about the count, the 710 crew named in the first minute, the frightened man reaching for a pod. He told them about the careful, patient order of the killing, the barges first because the barges had the teeth, then the skiffs, then the flagship last of all. He told them about the rot that rode the gun beam home against the fire, into the ship that fired it. He told them about the flagship that died from the inside, arguing to its last breath that it was only one ship, that they were the Kresh Reclamation, that they did not run. He told them about the record, the list of those who fired, and the one name left off it. And he told them, most of all, the part the Syndicate did not want to hear, the part that ended the Kresh Reclamation's 400-year hunt forever, and broke its hunger at last, that the Aegis hulls were not wrecks, that they had never been wrecks, that they were keepers, every one, a patient cold mind waiting in the dark for someone foolish enough to disturb a human grave, and that there were 2 of them still out there, awake now, and listening, holding a registry with every syndicate ship written into it by name. They did not believe him at first. The masters who remained called him a coward and a liar, a diver gone soft in the head from too long in the cold, and they were half right, because he was a coward. He had always been a coward, and the coward was the only thing that had brought him home alive. Then they sent a quiet scouting skiff back to the field to call him a liar to his face, with the proof in hand, and the skiff found 6 clouds of cooling vapor where the barges had been, and 19 dark hulks where the skiffs had been, and the great flagship Long Hunger drifting dead and silent with the cold body of Vren Solgov somewhere inside it, and 1 battleship, untouched, intact, every plate in place, not a mark on it that had not been 400 years old, the broken shield, and the whole shield behind it, bright and clean upon its scarred bow, sleeping in the center of all that death, like a thing that had done nothing at all, that had merely been there, that had merely been disturbed. After that, they believed him. There was an argument, in the high halls of the syndicate, in the days after the scout came back. There always is. A new master rose to take Vren Solgov's place, a younger creature, named Sethic, who had grown up on the stories of Aegis treasure and did not believe a coward's tale could be the whole of it. Sethic stood before the syndicate's council and said what Hesk had said in the skiff and what every brave creature always says, that it was one ship, that the diver had panicked, that a properly prepared fleet, a bigger fleet, the right weapons, the right approach, could take an Aegis hull and harvest the rot at last and make the Kresh Reclamation the masters of the dead worlds forever. He had charts, he had plans, he had the names of the two unfound hulls, scraped from old human records, and he meant to wake them on purpose, on his own terms, with his own guns ready. He was halfway through his plan when one of the council's old members, a creature so old it had been a diver itself in its youth, asked Sethic a single question. "How many fleets," the old one said, "have tried it your way?" Sethic did not answer. 10, the old one said, counting the long hunger. 10 fleets prepared, 10 fleets armed, 10 fleets certain, across 400 years. 9 of them you do not know about, because not one creature came home from them to argue in this hall the way you are arguing now. The 10th came home because the ship let one coward live to tell us to stop. And here you stand, the first creature in 400 years to hear the warning from a living mouth, and your answer is to be the 11th fleet. Sit down, Sethic. Sit down and be grateful you are the first master in our history who gets to choose not to die. The other 9 never had the choice. The diver bought it for you. Do not waste it. Sethic sat down. The Kresh Reclamation never sent another fleet to a human grave. The order went out across the syndicate, and then across the species, and then across every species in the dead worlds that had ever sent a diver into a human hull and lost him, and never known why. The Aegis fields were closed. The dead human worlds were to be left to their dead. The salvage maps, the great shared charts the scavengers had built over 1,000 years of robbing the galaxy's graves, were marked at last, in the careful, frightened symbols of 100 peoples who had finally learned the same lesson from one survivor's mouth, with the broken shield and the whole shield behind it. And beside the mark, in the trade tongue that every salvager could read, a single line that everyone learned and no one, ever again, was foolish enough to test. It said, "The grave is kept. Do not wake the keeper." Oxeltoon lived a long time after that, far longer than any diver had a right to, longer than the brave ones who had laughed at him in the barge holds, longer than the masters who had called him a liar, long enough to grow very old in a quiet place where no salvage fleet ever came. He never cut open another warship as long as he lived. He never went into the cold again, and when he was very old, and the young ones gathered at his feet to hear the story of the day the dead human battleship woke and ate a syndicate, he always ended it the same way, every time, in the same words, because the words mattered and he would not let them shrink. "People think the humans built warships," he would say. "They did not build warships. A warship is a thing you use and lose, a thing that dies when its crew dies, a tool, a room full of cold machines. The humans built something else. They built a promise, and they put 4,000 strides of armor around the promise to keep it safe, and they taught it to wait, and they taught it to count, and they taught it that the only thing in the whole galaxy worse than losing is letting the grave be robbed. And then they died, every one of them, all at once, and left the promise sleeping in the cold. 400 years it slept, and the day we walked into its halls to rob its grave, it woke up, and it kept the promise, and it spared one coward, so the rest of you would never have to learn this the way I learned it." And then he would look at the young ones, the brave ones, the ones who still believed, in the blood-deep way the young always believe, that a dead thing was simply a dead thing, and he would say the line the keeper had carved into him, as surely and as deeply as the humans had carved their answer beneath the curse on the bow of the sundering vow. "When a dead thing looks too whole," he would tell them, "it is not dead, it is waiting, and if it carries the broken shield with the whole shield standing behind it, then do not go aboard, do not fire, do not even read the name on its bow too long, because the reading will pull you in. Turn around. Go home and be glad you can. The sundering vow let me live so that you would not have to learn this the way the 9 fleets before me learned it. All at once, in the dark, with no one left to tell. Be smarter than the tithe master. Be a coward, like me. The cowards are the only ones who ever came back from a human grave alive. Far out in the dead worlds, in the cold and the dark where no salvage fleet would ever come again, the sundering vow slept on, its accounts closed, its grave kept, its vow unbroken in every part, waiting 400 years, and 400 more if it had to, for a foolishness that, thanks to one frightened diver and the truth he carried home, would never come. And somewhere beyond it, in the deeper dark, 2 more cold and patient minds lay sleeping in 2 more scarred gray hulls, with the broken shield upon their bows, and a syndicate's registry written into their memory, awake now beneath the silence, listening, keeping their own count, waiting with the bottomless patience of the human dead for a galaxy that had finally learned to leave them alone.